Anybody like to take the minutes of this meeting?
I mean, I'm going to be writing notes down in the system. I can do it.
Great.
Good.
Lisa could be committee person.
Okay. All right.
Good evening and welcome to the September 21, 2021 meeting of the Newtown Township Trails and Greenways Committee. I would like to remind everybody that this meeting is being recorded. Secretary Cook, could you please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. John Custer,
Here.
Mr. Anthony DiVincenzo,
Here.
myself, Erin Cook, present, Amy Blagger, here, Miss Bethany Dungisa,
You got it. I'm here.
Miss Delia Archer,
Here.
Mr. Joseph Falcon III,
Present.
Terry McCarthy,
Here.
Sharon Trio.
Here.
All members present.
Thank you. Also present are Township Manager Nease and Director Sharrots.
Yes, I did hear from Mr. Altieri, and he apologizes. He is at a work event tonight in another township. His firm represents another township, so
Thank you.
that's where he is.
May we have a moment of silence? You may want to keep in mind the refugees that are coming over from Afghanistan, making their way into this country to start a new life. Please rise and join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Is there any public comment for agenda items only? Hearing none, let's move on to the agenda. I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as written or any consideration of changes to the agenda.
I move.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Any further discussion by the board? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Next on the agenda are the minutes of the August 23, 2021 meeting. And I'll entertain a motion for approval of the minutes as they exist now or consideration of any changes.
I move to approve the minutes from August 23rd.
Second,
Second.
it has been moved and seconded. Any further discussion by the board? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Next on the agenda is a presentation by EAC Chairman Bruce Killen on the Greenways report and suggested Trails Committee activities. Bruce was chair of the steering committee for the report, brings with us a wealth of knowledge and provides some good information. Great.
Can people hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. I try my best on the slides. On a couple of them, the font's too small, so I'll try to talk through that. Second part is, if you have any questions, ask as I go along. It might make more sense. So I'll talk about where I think trails are today and how we got here as a result of the master plan. And I'll share some ideas that I have about going forward to take advantage of the plan to move us closer to pulling a shovel out and digging a trail. You can go next slide. Just wanted to briefly talk about the purpose of that, I don't know, it was 100+ page document. It had a couple functions. First, we had trail information all over the township, and it made sense to put it in one document. And I believe it's here. Now, there will be trails that don't make much sense that are in the document, and there'll be additional trails that come up that the document didn't consider. But we put the trail information in one place, as well as the open space information. There's a diagram and a list in the report of all possible spaces that could be protected. The other thing that we did is we collected public input. I almost thought it was unnecessary because every time we collect public input, trails comes up as number 1 or number 2, and that was the case here. One of the most important parts of this document is, in order to receive funding for the next phase of a trail, you have to have completed a master plan. So we can now check that off when we go seek funding for the next phase, which will be, a combination of design and construction. Like I said, it's a foundation for funding, and it's a tool for future initiatives. There's a lot of stuff in this report. I'll follow up with stuff. I've got 200 files. I'll forward them to John, and he can selectively distribute them. But there's some tools in here that kind of are unrecognizable in the report, and I have spreadsheets that sit behind all of the tables that appear in the document that I think would be valuable to you guys in the exercises you have going forward. The purpose of those tools, as I saw it, is to determine priorities as to which trails we should look for, which trails are low-hanging fruit, and which trails are maybe the benefits don't exceed the costs. So I think that using the spreadsheets and the information in there would be of some value. And finally, it's supposed to be a source of education. And I think it is a good source of information. And so it's like a dictionary for those people that haven't been involved in trail initiatives in the past. Next slide. I kind of wish this whole thing wasn't called trails, because it's really much more than trails. It's pedestrian and natural resource corridors. The vision of a greenway is a big trail that not only accommodates pedestrians, but also accommodates wildlife. And the greenway part, the wildlife part, is obviously a challenge in our township, the way it's bisected by Route 3 and Route 252. Some people call them linear parks. There's one that fits that description over in Lower Merion. Former railroad bed, 100 yards wide, benches, swing sets, a connectivity between the School River Trail and up to downtown Lower Merion. That's, the ideal linear park. And trails are used for two purposes. Trails are, whatever you want to call them, pedestrian walkways. The goal is to have them have two functions. One is utilitarian functions. When people go to the grocery store, go from neighborhood to neighborhood, go from a neighborhood to a park or to home to school, That's a utility function. The other function of trails is when you want to take your young child out in a stroller, take a bike ride, go roller skating, go running. That's considered a recreational trail. There's obviously overlap between the two. This is my pitch for how why we should do trails. I did some math here under community investment, and you'll be afraid of the numbers when you see some of the costs of some of these trail numbers. But let me tell you what I think of the math here. There's 5,000 houses. That's, I think, reasonably close. And according to studies, their equity in those houses would increase by 3% with a collection of trails throughout the township or trails nearby. And you convert that to spending X number of dollars on trails and getting a $52 million return on investment in terms of equity. So there's financial benefits to doing these trails and quality of life issues as well. I think Steve turned me on this whole walkability scale. And walkability scale is a measurement of how well your township does for pedestrians, bikes, and safety. So there's a long way to score, but it considers how you get from place to place, how safe it is for people, how easy it is to get to the key places of the township. And it also looks at environmental stewardship, and that is, are we creating those corridors? Are we creating maybe a stream buffer that serves as a riparian buffer as a result of putting a stream nearby? Next one. The other thing that people don't consider in trails is intersections. We need to implement these trails in a network fashion. We're going to need good intersections and good street crossing opportunities. So things to consider are pedestrian safety. I work with 14-year-olds. When you set your 14-year-old, to cross that intersection, the real value of trails is having a network of trails, not little segments around. With a street crossing, you can accommodate that. ADA is always part of it, not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because funding is, ADA compliance is linked to any funding opportunities. And the other thing about looking at intersections and street crossings is what you do for bicycle and walking accommodations, in fact, can slow down traffic. So trails or sidewalk or crossings have the benefit of slowing down traffic, which is, of course, a good thing. These are the types of trails that I consider, and they're probably, well, one of the spreadsheet categorizes this, but sidewalks, we've got a fair amount of sidewalks, but we have non-contiguous sidewalks that should be considered. And I think it would be part of your charter to take a look at those gaps in sidewalks. Roads, the other part is people ride their bicycles on the road, and that should be considered. You can ride from Newtown Square to Paoli on a 10-foot shoulder. Now, everybody wouldn't do that, but for the bicycle enthusiasts, or the ones that are commuting to work, they might take advantage of that. Road shoulders, yeah, that was road shoulders. Roads, I think an example of having cyclists be on the road or walkers is what we've done over here at Campus Boulevard. And paint a lane, identify that there's pedestrian traffic on it. I mentioned street crossings. Cinder paths are considered trails, very much like the Goshen Trail. Paved trails, very much like the Lister Trail exists right now.
And I have organic trails, and they're trails that maybe have been developed from people walking through the woods and have found a place. Next one. This is the sequence of what has to be done to make a trail happen. We did the master plan. We think it provided some guidance. We think it laid the foundation for the work that you guys are going to do. And now it's on you guys to do this prioritization, determine which trails make the most sense and characterize those trails. I know there's some descriptions in the report, but I think you have to go one step deeper in terms of that. Not done that. You have to do mobilization too. When you're looking at your agenda, you're going to do that tonight and probably the next couple sessions. Who does what and what is each person's responsibility? Then what happens, and I find this kind of weird, but most of this stuff is grant funded. So in the case of one grantee that I'll talk about in a bit, they say that you can get a grant for both designing the trail. When I say designing, laying out where the curbs go and the path goes, as well as constructing the trail under one grant. But typically, the next step here for you guys is to see that the trail gets adequately defined so that it can go to an architect, a trail architect, so that he can put together construction drawings. Then there's trail construction. It's kind of self-explanatory, and then as is the ribbon cutting. And you guys should get this done by June. No. All right, next slide. Oh, yeah, in terms of prioritizing, I get hit with this by mostly the people that don't want trails. It was, what do you mean they're planning a trail in my backyard? Well, these trails really aren't planned. They're under investigation. I think they're planned when you get everything wrapped up and you're seeking funding. But in my opinion, these aren't, we'll never get all these trails implemented. We're targeted for some and get some done, but I think when it alarms people that don't want the trail, and it sets up expectations for those people that do want the trail. So I'd suggest you use the wording, under consideration. In terms of prioritizing trails, as I mentioned, the greatest thing you can do to enhance the value of a trail network is to connect the pieces. We have, Goshen Road is a perfectly nice trail, but it goes nowhere. It doesn't connect to anything. Were it and other trails that connect it, they would have greater value. So when considering whether a trail has a high priority or not, you have to look at, does it provide a necessary connection? Cost is a factor. Like I said, don't be afraid of cost. I can provide some metrics. I think some numbers are in the report in terms of how much each trail would cost. And I was shocked, but I think they're fat, and but this stuff is expensive. Other thing is trail funding. Your greatest probability of getting grant funding for these things is to find a grantor that has a specific interest in this type of trail. And I'll provide a list to John of where the possible funding sources are that you have to consider. And then finally, the degree of difficulty. If a trail goes through a private residence, be prepared for a whole bunch of work. So how hard would it be to pull this trail off? Obviously, if it's on township property, it's low-hanging fruit. Next slide. You can't read this, but I'll talk through it. This is one of the spreadsheets that I asked to have put together. And what it is, down the vertical column on the left is a listing of all the trails that are defined on the trail map and further defined within the report. And on the right-hand side, we put a number of criteria that have a numerical value so that you can calculate, make an attempt to see how important each individual share of. The numbers that are on here came from the consultant. I might suggest that you guys talk about that sometime to see what your thoughts are on some of these individual trails. Next. Next step. Like I said, these are trails under consideration and possibly planned. And I think you're going to get approached by people. And I think it's important to position that way. And also where we are in this whole process, you're going to be approached by people that wanted a trail yesterday. And, you know, why aren't the bulldozers out making it? Second thing is cultivating relationships. There's a bunch of people bunch of townships doing great stuff, as well as a bunch of really not-for-profit consultants that are knowledgeable in this area. So I'd suggest get hooked up with some of these people in groups. John's familiar with Haverford Trail Group, and they've done a whole bunch, and I think you can learn from them, and no sense reinventing the wheel if they figure out how to do something well. The other thing is Penndot has a master plan for trails at the state level. Delaware County has a master plan for trails at the county level. And I think it's important for you guys to take a look at what their plans are, because it'll just help your knowledge base. Define tasks and multi-year schedule. This stuff doesn't happen quick. And the grant cycles or the funding cycles are annual typically. So you have to kind of follow a calendar when you try to make some progress. As I mentioned, know the design and phase criteria. We're in, I think, evaluation, which would move to planned, which would be moved to approved, which would then be moved to construction. I had mentioned that further characterizing the trail types might be an exercise for you guys. And I'm intentionally not talking about today specific trails, because I know everybody digs into that first. I was a sales guy, and the first thing my customers looked at was the price sheet on the last page. So that's the way people do these things. Budget, I think the report will help you. What I can provide, I have to dig through my 200 files, but there are some industry standards that say a paved trail costs X number of dollars per foot. A cinder trail costs this, and I can provide that. That might be of some value. Do some budgeting for each individual trail, and know the funding opportunities are existing out there, and try to cultivate relationships with the supervisors so they're on board for what contribution the township has to make. Here's my final thoughts, and having been many questions you can ask now or later. Now is the absolute best time, because if you wait, some of these trails will be blocked, they'll get more expensive, we're delayed satisfying the requests of the community. So now's the time. The longer we delay, the longer it's not beneficial. How these trails, the way I look at it, this is back to return on investment. There's property value is one benefit to a trail. The other benefit is quality of life. Is there a place for you to walk and meet your neighbors? Is there a place for your 3-year-old to ride a bicycle? So I think that trails have the opportunity to improve quality of life. I said prioritize these trails and go for the ones that are highest priority. The way you really have to operate is grab what you can. You know, if for some reason, I'm making this up, a Cinder Trail grant comes along and your idea is this gigantic scheme, go for the Cinder grant and try to implement the Cinder Trail first. I don't think you can bury yourself because the community is very interested in this. So I think it's important for you to get some people to show up at your meetings, same challenge we have with the EAC. I think it's important in terms of trails to make sure that zoning, planning, and the supervisors are kind of on board for the need to consider trail opportunities within new developments that have been proposed or redevelopment that obviously will be proposed in this township. And then the not in my backyard syndrome is each trail you tried to build, there'd be a vocal group of 24 people that don't want the trail, which is tough. But at the same time, there's 15,000 residents in this township, 90% of which have trail at the top of their mind when it comes to enhancements to the township. With that said, I'll take questions or commit to send some stuff to John so you guys are up to date. One question at least. Okay, well, thanks for having that.
You mentioned Cinder Trail, and I was looking at different kinds of media you can use to.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Oh, how about that?
That's better.
Okay, you mentioned cinder trails.
Yeah.
And I was looking up what kind of medium are used for trails that would be more permeable.
Yeah.
Is there a location you could point us to or some content you could give to the township about, you know, well-researched, maybe some resin base that are better than macadam or
Right.
whatever?
Yeah, I think I can find that because the resin base is probably more expensive than cinder, but cinder high maintenance.
High permeability, but yeah, high maintenance. Yeah.
Pardon me?
High permeability, but high maintenance.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I was curious about, I don't know if you're the person who asked this, but how does the ADA stuff fit into the natural surfaces stuff? Like, obviously, there are trails under this committee that are bike paths and pedestrian walkways specifically, but then you brought up a good point, which I was already going to ask as part of this, was the wildlife stuff. Trying to connect some of the major green spaces to not only the other green spaces in our township, but things in the neighboring townships, some of the bigger parks that do have wildlife and be able to give those quarters. But then I was wondering about funding, and is it smart to group some of them together with, I'll call more hard surfaces, concrete, asphalt near the roads, so that we could get bigger grants that require the ADA requirement, but get some sort of other funding for these green spaces, things that the DCNR would like as well.
Yeah,
So that's, but I don't know if you're the right person. I don't know if you've done that research, but
I've done some research in that area. I've lived some of it, and I'll tell you this about grants and funding.
Bruce is an expert on grants. He has a very
I
high
spent some time with
success rate.
grants. But you can get a grant for, I'll just say $15,000, and it costs you $25,000 to administer it and the paperwork associated with it. So I'd encourage, go after the big money. Doesn't make, it's not worth it to go after the small stuff, especially if you have your ducks in order and your opportunity matches the focus of the person or the organization that's doing the grant.
You made a comment too about the estimates when you initially saw them, your feels and thoughts on that. I don't know how Gilmore did their estimates, but when I looked in the initial number here, I didn't have time to backtrack, and I do estimating for construction all the time, but I didn't have backtrack the whole number. But what concerned me about was the contingency. That is nowhere near high enough for the industry standard at this planning phase. So you were saying, I hope you're right. The big number was fat and heavy because the contingency is very low. And that is actually kind of scary.
I don't know that level of detail because I
Okay.
haven't looked in a while. There's no contingency line item in these.
No, there is.
No, there
but it's
is.
just not very high.
It's
Oh,
very
okay.
small for this level of planning. Usually in this early of a stage, your contingency is extremely high for a reason because your level of details is there. And then as you get further down, when you actually engage with an architect or designer, contractor, and you're planning out, you can narrow that down. But even as you get towards final design in public works projects, 10%, you don't want to go lower than that because there's just too many things that can happen
Things will happen.
along the way. And the state looks at that kind of stuff. I know in grant writing for other projects,
Yeah.
heavy civil stuff.
Mhm.
So if they're going to supply the grant, they want to make sure that we planned, because the contingency usually is going to come out of the township's pocket.
Right.
They've already committed so much money and they're not just going to give you more for it. So that's one thing that would scare me as a resident in the township, many members. I want to make sure that whatever estimates we get together at the end of this, I think these need to be revisited. One, because of the change in all construction materials in our industry,
Right.
labor force, everything's going up. And that's concerning because it's unfortunate because this isn't that old. It's only a year, but
It's been a bad.
Yeah, what I would tell you is that it's still, this is a high level document. And it's kind of getting, until we really start doing the feasibility studies, we're not really going to have a really good number. It may be a number that throws out there that kind of gives you a general idea. But when we do the feasibility studies, which, I think George will talk about later in regards to the grant that we applied for, that's when we'll really start seeing the right, we'll start getting into a more detailed number, looking at what really is going to cost, having an engineer really reevaluate at the time. I mean, I've got feasibility studies that have been done for lots of projects that I know today don't mean anything because of everything that's happened with COVID, and so, I look at any project that we're about to do and we look at, we're going to go in and what we normally think we're adding 20 to 50% to, depending on the type of project it is, just because of what the additional costs are.
yeah, and I would say that that's fairly accurate. You're very high level, you're 50% plus or minus. And then as you get down to feasibility level, you should be within 30% contingency at that point, once you have that delivered. And then maybe even less. And then once you get the final, that's where you want to hit that 10% mark. That I think would be appropriate, especially as we go to apply for a lot of these grants. The state might want to see, if we're going for state grants, that we have all of our ducks in a row and have the funding to be able to match or meet whatever obligation plus that contingency. So that was my biggest concern, but it's good to know that I'm hoping you're right. And that their initial number was fat, so that contingency doesn't matter as much.
I think their initial numbers were, the trail was 2 miles long.
Yeah.
The industry spec says, $200 a foot. They multiplied one against the other, and that's how they came up with the number. I'm not, they didn't dig deep.
It's probably RS means, it's like straight out of the textbook and you just
Exactly.
look it up. Yeah. I think you're right. Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
Bruce, could you
Go ahead.
share, what's a big money grant? What's the big kind of number represent? Is it 5 million? Is it 20 million? Is it?
It's, I would call big $500,000 plus.
We applied for 2 grants this fall, or not this fall a year ago, that were both about 2.5 million. So we've gone for those numbers. We applied for them. I think we talked about one of them actually last time. We ended up applying for 2.5 million and got 650,000. So, we need to have contingency set in place so that when we do get those smaller amounts like that, closer to the 500,000, that we can do a section of what we thought we were going to do. That's going to be the challenge that's going to have to be before us. And we're going to have to always be looking at priorities and how we're going to do that. If we get X, if we get Y, what becomes the pieces that we do.
Might go into our strategy too, is that we might purposely aim high on some of these, knowing that we're not going to get the total amount, but knowing that if we get a portion, what is our low end that we need to get to actually make even a section possible? That's good.
What I've done in previous grant proposals, they publish who won grants last year, how much was it for, what was it for, and you try to tailor the proposal based on what they're giving money away for. So all that's public domain information. All right, thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
With your permission, we would love to consult with you going forward, because I know you're a reservoir of
I
information.
want to see this happen.
Hey, don't change your address, okay? Okay, moving along, we're into new business now. First item under new business is item 8.1, discuss the committee's charter and scope. And this is usually the place to start. We need to know what we're going to be doing and what the parameters are that we're going to operate under. I took a flyer and put together a few items here. It's not intended to be complete in any way. So I'd like to open up the floor for any discussion about the existing items or possible new items that would go into the scope.
You're talking about anything under the 8.1 through 8.8?
Yep.
They did? Okay. Yeah.
Mhm.
Can we read them?
Yes?
Yeah.
Can you
why
read
not?
them out loud?
Oh, absolutely. Number one is implement the Newtown Township Greenway and Open Space Network Plan by establishing the new trails and open space identified on the plan. And that's kind of a no-brainer because that's kind of our initial position. Number two, identify and establish new trails and open space opportunities. And we're going to be on the lookout for those. This might be a little bit early to come up with some of those alternatives, but anybody have a suggestion? Okay.
No.
Seems early.
Number three is manage, train, and work with trail groups and other volunteers to maintain and implement walking trails. And we're blessed with having a number of trail groups in the area. We have Friends of Marple Newtown Trails. Doug Humes is heading that up. And we also have the running place right here. And they have a lot of people at their disposal. And another thing we may want to consider is the Bicycle Coalition of Greater Philadelphia. They always present at the Trails Summit in Haverford Township.
Don, can you clarify, when you say that, that we're going to work with groups to maintain these trails, is it then a public responsibility or is there funding, for these to be maintained, or does it pretty much history-wise fall on the public to?
Okay, well, right now it's falling on Public Works, and I know they're overburdened for having to do that. So what we would like to do is get some of these groups together. And I know both these people, I'm going to have to reach out, or anybody can reach out to the Bicycle Coalition if they're familiar with them, and look to them for guidance. What I hope to do next month is bring in Rich Kerr from Friends of Marble, Friends of Haverford Trails. He is one of the founders of that whole group and got it started. These are an outside group that works very closely with the township, and they've got a lot of latitude. And they do a lot of good things. We would like to get those groups in the fold and work with us to do
And
that.
do you know, do we have an active Sierra Club chapter in the area? I used to do a lot of trail work through the Sierra Club, and I don't know if they at all have a presence, you know,
No,
here
unfortunately
in
not.
terms of trail
They don't.
building. We used to build and maintain.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, any of these groups that have a potential connection would be good.
Yeah, I'm a member of the Sierra Club. I've tried to find and try to connect
Yeah.
with like a lot of members, and they don't seem to have I'll say it, a very organized.
And the nature.
Force here,
the
comparatively
Nature Conser-
speaking.
The Nature Conservancy is the other one that I've had a lot of experience
Yeah.
working with, but these others are great, and I've found there's a lot of camaraderie certainly, but just wanted to clarify, as I say, was there, you know, any funding to, because build it and we have to maintain it. Thank you.
Okay. Next number is conduct nature walks, field trips, environmental education, and other public events relating to trails. And I think we need to reach out to some outside groups, but I think we have some of the necessary people here, and I'd like to develop that capability. I mean, if we could get a party together like we had in St. Albans Circle on Saturday, we would have accomplished a whole lot. Because that was just wonderful.
I want to go back real quick. So when we talking with the other trails groups and the running club, the walking clubs, all the cycling, one of the things that it talks like manage, train, and work with. I feel like that's a good opportunity when we talk with them about safety on existing stuff, because people seem to have never had the unfortunate events that lead you to look up this stuff. But like pedestrians and cyclists alongside the road is a huge issue up and down our township. I cycle, I run. Nobody seems to understand that you're supposed to go walk and run against traffic and cycle with. And you always end up in a scenario where people have just always their whole life right side and they're walking. And then you have this issue with other people coming out. And I can't tell you how many times either myself or other people, then you're forced out into the road when there's traffic coming just because of that little thing. But maybe that's something when we talk with these groups is like,
Excellent.
there's a running group that runs by my house in our neighborhood every Monday. And like little things like that.
That's
Getting
running
them,
place?
it might be, I
I think
don't
it
know,
is.
honestly. I wanted to stop them, but I wasn't
Yeah.
home early enough last night.
I
Didn't
couldn't
get a
catch
chance
up with
to.
them.
Yeah, well, not with your back now.
No.
But yeah, I wanted to see like, maybe that's something where when we do this kind of stuff and we put up trails, we can have signage. It's like run against traffic, cycle with, like little things like that, but also talk with those groups. And when they indoctrinate members to get into a more healthy lifestyle, they're talking to them about it.
The same thing with bells, you know, on bikes and things like that. You have little kids
Yeah.
learning to ride and you don't have a bell and you could do some damage. Yeah.
Mhm.
Even if you're a little one. So yeah, no, it's a good point with the safety.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I'm always out with the dog and I just see it constantly, and it's unfortunate. And I think that's part of this, even if we don't have the trails yet, it could take a while to get some of these in. We want to make sure that the people that are still using in the neighborhoods and alongside some of the existing stuff are using as safe as we can.
I
Okay.
think adding that is a really good idea from Bruce's presentation, the deployment phases. At the end of the last deployment phase, one thing that I thought was missing was like community outreach and education, like how to use the trails. We talked about doing an app, promoting them, telling people what is the safest way to use them, putting up some signage. I think like we could, part of our charter should be when we're doing that deployment phase to get the word out and do some marketing and talk to people about them. Because we talked at our last meeting about the Meadow Preserve and nobody knows that's there. And I didn't know it was there. And I live right behind there and I've walked my dogs there every day now. It is amazing and there's nobody there. And that one little sign that
Well, not
Episcopal
now.
has has
Yep.
on their street that says private property, people think it's
Oh,
private
yeah.
property.
Yeah.
Nobody knows it's back there. So that has to be, I think, part of our last deployment phase after we get through the design, build, approvals, everything, to figure out our way to integrate the public and educate the public about the trails and the open spaces.
And there's no
Leonard-
parking there either. I mean,
Exactly.
You can't even access those trails.
No, you can't. I park at the Goshen Trail
Yeah,
and walk all the way across
Yeah.
the center. Yeah.
That's in
Hopefully
the
that
next
will be
item.
coming.
Well, that's in the next item too, but I think you're right. And like Leonard does a great job with Facebook.
Yeah.
I would have never even known that you guys were looking for committee members had he not posted it. And I think he said, him and Mike said that it wasn't until the last moment that all of a sudden all these resumes came in.
Mhm.
And I think that's because I'm not going on the township website very often.
No.
But, you know, I get a lot of my news, a lot of other stuff, and just scrolling through the feed, and he posted, I was like, interesting, like, yeah, like I want to go talk to him about that. So maybe that's something when we create our own Facebook page. I mean, the Schuylkill River Trails has a Facebook page. I follow it because they're giving notices on trail closures, updates on new extensions that they're putting in, and they always do the safety stuff. They're constantly posting like, hey, remember, do this, and, you know, friendly reminders to pick up dog waste and where they put in dog waste bag stations, all that kind of stuff. So that could be, that would be really good. And like you said, deployment.
Would it
phase.
make
Yeah.
sense to edit number 4 to add community education?
Well, I was going back to number 3 just because of the training part, manage, train, and work with trail groups. But yeah, you're right. It's not just with trail groups, it's with education of the public through
Yeah.
probably social media outreach and whatever else we can do.
Yeah, and I would think, Erin, I think your suggestion's a very good one, and it can start now. I know you've probably noticed if you're on the Newtown page, whenever we go for a walk, my husband posts my picture and talks about the trail, and here's how you get there. And it starts with us doing it, some of these community groups, and people, have all these things, where is that, et cetera. So I think to build that interest now, we can get that community together.
Maybe
again.
a map that shows that and do it in a rather simplified version that anybody can understand. Okay, work to improve access to existing trails, including additional parking spaces. I think that someone else had put that in.
Yeah.
yeah,
So
Sharon.
I think that's important.
yeah. What I really noticed is I went to Greer Park and, I've been going there since I was probably 5. And you can't park there. And if there's mommy groups that want to go there, they can. Because the business next door takes up that tiny little parking area anyways. It's a beautiful park, but you can't,
Yeah.
nobody can get to it.
Is it
And
okay
that's
if they
horrible.
park in the business side? You think?
During, after, is it 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock? I think 4 o'clock. After 4 o'clock, the parking lot is open to anybody
Okay,
for parking. Up until 4 o'clock, the business has the right to park there.
okay.
Why?
But if there's a lot of open spaces,
Excuse me?
is that possible that township?
I'm sorry, say that again?
If there's a lot of open spaces there, it would seem that they might not be full.
Can't we make the parking lot bigger?
Well, that's part of the Greer Park Master Plan, is to
Uh-huh.
actually expand the parking lot.
Okay,
Just real quick, briefly, the deal was that business actually maintains and takes care of that parking lot for us.
They
There's-
constructed it.
They
Well,
constructed it. There's 4 spaces that are dedicated to the park for public parking during the day, after hours and on weekends. Anybody can park in any of the spaces, but during the day, during the business hours, there are just 4. And so part of the Greer Park Master Plan that we just completed 3 months ago? 3 months ago, actually has adding, I think it's an additional 15 spaces or something like that.
So just a clarification, and not to wordsmith, but when we talk about working to improve, are we talking about identifying the opportunities here, as opposed to, what what are we saying in this particular thing? We're just that there is work to improve access, I'm just wondering, what do you want the committee or envision the committee to do there? Is our process one of
Yeah.
identifying, and then publicizing
I
or?
think there should be signage. I'd love to go down the middle of the night and take up that no trespassing sign, but I'm not allowed to do that. That sign is on 10 feet of ownership by
Episcopal.
Episcopal.
Mhm.
And I think that we would like to have our own sign.
We should.
Yeah.
Because it's only because they don't want you to park there for the baseball games.
Mhm.
But they have that board, that glass, big board, et cetera. You would think
Yeah,
that we might be able to do something just. to
Yeah.
improve that.
There is an opportunity right at the end of the access road, where the access road, if you've been down, it turns right. Along that left-hand side, after it turns right, there's a possibility of anywhere between 13 and 22 parking spots. And the Township is looking at that. And that could open it up.
So is it actually private property where they have the signage?
Yes,
Yes.
Okay, so they're not doing anything wrong there.
Nope,
It's just,
they're not.
it's misleading that, yes, what that is, and you can go over here, but it's just misleading because of how it's set up and people are confused, so they just,
it doesn't
rather
say that
not.
we have a right of way to go down.
gotcha.
which
Because
we
they,
do.
they own whatever it is, the 10 feet that's right on 252
No, this is the 10 feet on the left-hand side
On the
of
left-hand
the
side.
driveway.
of the driveway.
Yeah,
So we can use that driveway.
absolutely.
Oh,
And that's not,
we
isn't
could put
very
a sign up
clear.
there today then, if we can use that driveway.
And
I thought that
Since you're talking
driveway
about
was
right
their
here.
property.
Yeah,
we're
we
talking
need to
about
have
right
some
here. Well, the
property to put
driveway
the sign on.
The
now.
driveway
Yeah,
is their
because these are
property.
The fields.
I just, the driveway is their property, but we have an easement right
Mhm.
to access our property through that driveway.
Right.
So, but I mean, we have that easement right, so people can go down there and access it. We can put parking down there, and we are looking at that.
Maybe.
My concern is until we get parking down there, I don't know if we want 30 cars down there
Right.
because there's nowhere for 30 cars to go, or
Right.
even 20 cars to go, or really even turn around and do it safely on township property.
Right.
So we need to look at that, and that may be one of our first, you may all decide that's one of the first projects, working with the Parks Committee, to say this is probably one of the first things we ought to tackle so that we can access trails there at that location.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Is that, I'm looking at this now and just the acreage, and if we already have a right of way for access, and then the township owns the land immediately in there off of that road, then parking lot, signage on 252, signage on, what's the other road?
Well, I mean, we don't own out of 252, so that's going to be a little bit more of a challenge.
Okay,
But we, when you get down to the 50 acres, we own the 50
Yep.
acres. And so when the road turns, for those of you who've been there, when you go down the road, it's fairly straight. If you go down that road, when the road turns, roughly at where it turns, it's about 500 feet, I guess more than that, but down, we have actually owned the road where it turns, when it makes that right angle and goes back towards Episcopal, we own, that's on township property.
you own all the way to where it connects into the, it looks like it's even different macadam on the surface of the aerial. I'm imagining
Yeah.
maybe that's why, because we did one section of Episcopal to the other, but okay.
Well, we haven't, I don't think we've ever,
Not in our time.
not in our time.
If you
Like,
go down
so-
that road and take that right, you'll look that there's a sort of a shelf to the left,
Yeah.
which can entertain parking space.
Mm.
So that's what we're going to investigate and look at.
I mean,
Is
it
that
looks like
grass
it's-
now?
Hmm?
Is it grass now?
It's more overgrown
Yeah, it's
than it is
nasty.
grass right now.
Okay.
There's some spots where you can kind of pull off, but you don't clear the road, the driveway. Part of the challenge is that driveway is not very wide.
Right.
The driveway's, about 14
If
feet at the very most. So you just don't have a very wide driveway. So if people aren't far enough off, then we impede traffic that could go that way. And Episcopal does use that for some of their folks to enter and exit the campus from time to time. So,
Have we given them an easement?
well, the easement is that easement's both sided, right? So if we stop their easement, they could probably stop our easement, so we don't want to do that. But it is a joint easement, but and they're just in full clarity. There's been some debate with Episcopal. They now understand and they agree that it's actually includes public access. They initially said it was only for township employees to access to maintain. We've said, no, that's not right. It actually is, the easement is broader than that. And there's case law that gives that. And that's the basis. So that's how we got to where we are. But we need to continue to work through it. There's still a couple things in regards to where we are doing the parking, how we do the parking. And we have a couple neighbors that if you're familiar, when you kind of access where the trail is right now, there's literally a house that's 5 feet from our property line. Basically, it's not much more than that. And so we just want to be a good neighbor as we go forward, because the last thing we want to do is go in and make it so that is not a good spot for them. So we're working through that whole process.
Is the Lister Trail part of the township property?
So when you get, the best way for me to give you, to tell you is that George's team has gone out and they put in some split rail fence, I guess is what you call it, on that area down there. You can go and see where you're on township property and where you're not at the Meadow Preserve. And if you kind of watch the split rail fence, you can kind of see, it's not through all the thicket areas and things like that, but where there's kind of open field areas, his team has gone through. Is it every 50 feet?
It's about every 50 feet.
About every 50 feet, we've put in some split rail fence. I think it's 2 sections or 1 section. And then we go another 50 feet, put another section in to give some definition. We don't want to fence it all in. That's not the goal, but just to give some definition of where that space is. But the Lister Trail that you see on there is, it hasn't been done yet, but the Lister Trail is going to be, we're going to be given an easement for that purpose, and it will be a public easement. And the township, this committee, one of the things that we'll be responsible for is maintaining that trail that goes from Goshen Road all the way up and into the 50 acres.
Right now, does Lister maintain it?
Actually, right now, Toll Brothers maintains it.
Okay.
That's part of, what they're doing. I say Toll Brothers is maintaining it. They're getting it into shape for us so that we can take a dedication of the
So
trail.
that explains the why in the winter, because I run that, that it wasn't plowed, for instance.
We will, even when the township takes it on, we will post signs that we're not maintaining that in the winter. We do not have the
Yeah.
resources.
No, and that's good to know, yeah.
We don't have the resources to maintain that to a safety spot.
And again, that's just good education, because I think it's all about, expectations and transparency.
Sure.
So if people know that, then those that want to run will put on ice things on their shoes if they
Sure.
want to do that. And the others at least won't go, darn, why isn't this done? When in fact, it's, we just say when it is maintained. This is
Right.
a,
We
3-season trail.
Yeah, it's kind of like our Goshen Trail.
Yeah.
We maintain it through, but once we hit winter months and we're having ice and those kind of things, there's no way we could stay on top of it. There's just too many places.
So we would maintain it, but I'm assuming the homeowners association that is that development that Toll Brothers built would still technically own the land that it's on. Correct?
They will.
Okay.
Yeah, so we will maintain, they're 6 feet to 8 feet, most of the trail.
Yeah, it varies.
It varies,
Yeah.
but most of it's about 6 to 8 feet. There's actually a 10-foot easement that will be granted to us so that we can go down and maintain that trail.
That
So
makes sense.
question, we've talked a lot about just sort of quick wins in terms of signage and things like that. Is there funding now? So if this group, identified that there's some quick wins that could be done just through signage to make people feel better about using it or want to use it more, et cetera, is there money available, or will all funds have to be sourced for every initiative?
Well, I mean, we put in some money into the budget every year for park improvements and trail, trail maintenance and those kind of things. My guess is as this group starts moving forward, we're going to be going to the board and asking for more dollars because you're going to be doing more things. I don't know the exact dollar we have right
No,
now.
yeah, and I don't know the
There's
exact
some
dollars,
things,
so no worries.
Goshen Trail is a very high maintenance trail. We're out there constantly putting down, additional stone and cinders to keep that maintained. It's just a very high maintenance trail. The way it's set, there's a lot of washout. Poor George's team, every time it rains heavy, it's like, we know that's what's going to happen. They got to go back out and do it again. And so, we'll probably coming back and making a recommendation to you all that there's some sections that we think probably need to have macadam versus just cinders. Our preference is not to go through and put macadam all the way through the township everywhere and do that. We don't think that's the best long-term approach for the environment and everything else. However, there are places where the washout is so strong that we think that it would be better, but it also includes and means that we're going to have to figure out how to do some stormwater management in those locations, because we've actually done that in a couple of locations, and the water is now starting to undermine the edges of that area because that's just what's happening. So we just want to be careful. And so what I will tell you is we will work with you. If we don't have money in the budget, I will go back to the board and ask for money, particularly if it's what I call one-time expense. We have dollars in our capital fund that we potentially could apply to that if it's a one-time expense. Signs typically are not something we replace every year.
Right.
You put a sign up that might last 5 or 10 years. If we can get it in initially, then we can work with the finance team and start saying, we put in $500 worth of signs. We now need to be thinking about every 10 years to have money for those $500.
Yeah, good. Thank you for the clarification.
Is it possible that this committee could get a line item in the budget for 2022? And if that's the case, what do we need to do to substantiate that?
Yeah, you need to work with Rich Lafayette. He's our finance person. If there's something that you're really looking at trying to do, we budget in 3 basic ways that we think about things. One is personnel. So if you're thinking that you want some time from George's team to do something, then I ask you to request that so that we can be smart and we can. George is sitting here going, oh, don't tell me that. But in all seriousness, we have to plan based on what we think each committee's asking and know what all the other projects that we're trying to take care of. So if you're interested in personnel time, I actually want you to ask for personnel time. Particularly for like my time and Rich's time, that we just do that. But like if you're wanting manpower to go and do something to achieve something, then we would want that. Secondly, we budget for capital projects. Capital projects typically are any expenditure over $5,000 that does not repeat within a year. So, that's our typical divide line that we use to do that. It usually needs to be more than just a maintenance of something. If it's just maintenance, I want to put it under operating, but if it's something that adds great value to the life of a trail or to creating, for example, if we decided we wanted to put the parking lot in at the new location or up at the 50 acres, that's more than $5,000. But, and we decided to do that, you wanted to do that in a year. And we said, look, that project's $200,000. And so we would put that in the budget as a capital item, but it's not something that we're going to be needing to budget every year. But if you decide that you want to put in dog collection stations of dog waste, there's a cost to the bags, there's a cost to all those things, then that would be operating expense. It doesn't meet the $5,000 requirement, and we would just do that. Now, there may need a $5,000 requirement and just be maintenance of a spot on a trail, particularly as we start expanding the trails. I don't know if George is hitting $5,000 on the Goshen Trail every year, but we're probably pretty close to it.
Pretty close.
And that's okay. That's just maintenance that we'll continue to do. But if we were to go and pave the entire Goshen Trail, that would be more of a capital project, if that kind of helps you understand the
What
difference.
about large scale maintenance? Like, I don't know if this was from Ida or not, but I was telling John, I went over to the Drexel Hill Lodge Park and did the trail. And there was massive amount of trees down. It looked fresh.
Yeah.
They were blocking the trail. Is that, like, that's usually not a cheap undertaking. And then to get even somebody back there with the equipment because of the size of the trees, all that kind of stuff that they would need to do, would probably be expensive. Is that something, because it's like a major storm that doesn't happen every year? Is that something that would potentially have to fall into that, like capital improvements?
It probably wouldn't be under capital unless it's actually taking trees down.
Well, that's why I brought that up.
If it's just going and cutting up trees that are down, our public works team does a lot of that in-house.
Okay.
To be honest with you, that trail's not an easy one to do it on. It's
I
not
know.
like we can take equipment back there very easily. You're not driving the truck back there and handling it. I know that several times on the Goshen Trail, even they've gone down and they've just cut a width so that people can still use the trail, but we've just let the trees lie on either side, occasionally in that area. So we would do that in that area for sure.
The reason I bring it up is that it goes into what you just said, which is taking down trees, because there are a lot of other dead trees that are right next to the trail that could pose a threat. And then I don't know how that works with the liability of the township, but again, I'm just, because this is also new, so many questions running through my head as I'm going to the parks and looking at stuff. And that was one of them was, is that under this committee? Or because that's within a park, it already exists, does that fall under the parks department?
The trail falls under you. The park piece falls under the parks, but because it's a tree, it falls under the shade tree. And the shade tree commission owns the trees.
I just opened up a whole can.
This
So-
taking thing is extreme.
So,
Yeah, I'm
so
sorry.
we'll take care of managing which particular committee is the one that's responsible. You won't have to worry about that. But if you see something like that, please let George know. And so we can start addressing it to the right location, because, for example, trees are something that is actually there. The tree commission actually is formed by an ordinance. You all were formed by a resolution, and the tree commission actually has some ownership responsibilities to the trees. So they actually get to determine whether or not we take a tree down, even on township property, where for trail purposes that you're making recommendations to the board. But the Shade Tree Commission actually has authority.
So that's a good point. So for purposes of logistics, anything we do here is a proposal that has to be voted on by the board of supervisors.
Correct.
And out of curiosity, has the Shade Tree Commission or even you guys have like, I know there's hazard tree analysis where you look at the cost benefit of taking it down and stuff like that. Like are the Shade Tree Commission folks trained on that so they can kind of weigh out
Yeah.
whether or not it needs to come down?
So not necessarily all of them. Some of them, we've got two that are actually tree guys. That's their business. They run tree business. And then two others on there. One is a horticulturist that I can't remember exactly where she is, but very, very smart in that area. Another one works with the U.S. Forestry.
Oh, good.
So we have people, and another one actually was the other gentleman was in Radnor and was the part of their initiating Shade Tree Commission. So we have a ton of experience on our Shade Tree Commission. But to answer your question, even if we didn't have all that experience, the township has hired an arborist who is a third party who, when we have a question, we have some guys on our public works team that can go out and quickly evaluate and know whether something is an issue, and be able to tell the quality of a tree and those kind of things. But if there's a question, we have an arborist on payroll. I say on payroll, he's on contract, that we can bring in as we need to address those things.
So as you said, Joe, we make a recommendation to the board for something like this because it's related to the trails, but then it then would go to the board, which would then talk to the Shade Tree Council, who
Well,
would then actually make the determination if something like this would happen.
let me back up.
Mhm.
So if it's related to trees, you report it to George. George is going to make sure it's on the Shade Trees Commission's next agenda to take care of it. Whatever they decide, we actually have to take and go do. The only thing would be an issue is if it was above our budget, then I have to go back to the board for permission to increase the budget, because the only group that has authority to increase the budget is the Board of Supervisors. Okay, but if it's within the budget, George would take action on it and it would just be taken care of. If you all make a recommendation, or if you all make a decision about a trail, if you make a decision that you want to go put a trail in a certain location, you go out and you figure out what it is, you've done all your homework, you make a recommendation then to the Board of Supervisors, this is what we want to do. We want to apply for this grant, we want to do this, and we want to do whatever the things are. And then they give you the authority to move forward and go do it, and for what that is. But so there's a little bit of a difference in the way it was set. And it's very similar. Your setup is very similar to the Environmental Advisory Councils. You're recommending body back to the board. This is what we should do. And then the board blesses it, and then you go do it.
Do they have any appropriations for like low hanging fruit? They were talking about signs. Get that more quickly done.
We have some money in the budget that George has today
Yeah.
that we can do. And if it's greater than that, I would just go to the board and ask
Right.
for additional funding.
Going back to trail maintenance, there's sometimes where you get understory growth that creeps in and stuff like that. Would that fall underneath our category of having to take care of, or would the understory growth then fall underneath the Shade Tree Commission? Or is it kind of that gray area? Like, can we go out there with loppers, or have volunteers go out there with loppers, or does it need to go through all the channels and
I think that as long as we are not taking the tree down
Okay.
and we're not hurting the health of the tree.
Yeah.
When Pico goes in and cuts the big V in the middle and makes it look just gorgeous, the Shade Tree Commission would definitely have control if we were doing that.
yeah,
But if we're coming up and just keeping the trail open, it's no different than Georgia's team going out for the purpose on a roadway when a limb starts to grow over and it actually is going to be able to hit a car or hit a truck.
Okay.
Then they go in and they maintain that.
John, in terms of getting back to the scope, which, and thank you, as you know, when we corresponded, I said sort of like, what are we here for? And I think this is very good. Would we then, I hear a lot talking about make recommendations in terms of budget items, and I don't see anything here in terms of that. So I don't know if that's something we want to insert, just so that, we're mindful of the fact that there is, recommendations for spending. And should there be an overlay here, or perhaps this is the township's role where they look at this and put in some initial information saying that essentially our role is, making recommendations as opposed to, being empowered to do this
Yeah.
stuff, as it were.
I think that's a good idea. We want to be as proactive as we can. And I think one thing we can be doing now is trying to justify what we might ask for as far as a line item. When is our deadline for that? But
Well, normally it would be passed, but because you're a new committee, we can probably take it after your October meeting. That would be the latest. So we would need to have you really think about it between now and October. Unless you come back and tell me you want $50,000, we can probably fit it inside the budget. We would have to work at doing that. But we would work through that and try to figure that out.
like that. Okay, item number 6, work with outside groups to connect Newtown's trails with trails in other townships. And this is going to be a wonderful opportunity because especially in Radnor, if we can get over there in any meaningful way, it's going to open up everything. There are also opportunities in Edgemont. If we get a trail down to Crum Creek, there's a possibility of crossing Crum Creek and working our way up to 2 natural lands trust properties, 40 acres each, which I've been back there a couple of times. They're gorgeous. So also in Marple, there are opportunities. And I would like to get this group involved in, if we go toward the Rum Creek Trail, I think this trail could pass over into Willistown and then come back. Because I know there's areas in Newtown which are very steep slopes and not much of an opportunity. So I think this is hopefully could be a major part of what we do. Just getting involved with them, getting to know them and react to opportunities. Right, number 7, create documentation for a township official map to safeguard opportunities for future trails and open space. Does anybody know what an official map is? Can I describe that for you?
Please.
Okay. Official map is a creature of legislation. There's something in Pennsylvania state law that provides for it. What it enables a township or other body to do is locate areas in the township that they may want to acquire or make some other relationship for. They would put that on a map. After it gets approved by the supervisors, it would be recorded. And what this does is that if any of these areas that are on the map, a developer comes along and wants to develop it, then the township has a 1-year period in which to negotiate for some sort of a purchase or something along that line. It doesn't give them the right to take it over if the developer negotiates in good faith and it doesn't go forward, then we've lost it. But it gives us an opportunity, and gives us an opportunity to go out and get grants. And we had tried to do that back in 2007, and it didn't quite make it. So it's always going to be in my bonnet. It's very beneficial, especially for this committee, because we can put trails in and make sure that they're protected. So I think I would like to see this as an early effort by people in this group to try to get that done. Now, it may have to wait for certain zoning to take place in the township.
We were trying to tie it to the zoning, but
Okay.
I think the thing is, I would suggest that if you're going to do it, official map really tends to look at basically 4 things. Tends to look at places we want to put streets, look at places we wanted to put parks, places we want to put open space, and places we want to put trails. Those are typically the things that the official map. It could also be if the township, like, for example, George and I have been looking for over the years for a good space for a leaf site. If we had a place, you could put that on there as an open space, but for producing for that. And so anyway, those are examples of what are typically on an official map. So if you're going to do that, my recommendation would be that we get the parks and rec group involved so that if we create this document, it's actually a document that works for both sides. And
Okay.
they look at where places where we think parks are important and look at that because we've had the conversation and part of the strategic plan is that, the township folks would like to see more parks. And in order to do that, we're probably going to have to look at acquiring some property, even some property that may already be developed and actually take it from being developed and make it into more open space and parkland.
Is that, so I forget the name of it, but what was the property that Marple just bought?
The Don
Marple Green
Cornello.
Spaces?
Don Guanella. Is
Don
that-
Cornello, thank you.
Yeah.
So is that something that Marple did essentially? Marple had on their township plan that property, if ever they wanted an opportunity to.
I
do
don't,
it?
I don't think that was
Okay.
the way they did that one.
Yeah, actually, it
I
was
think
purchased
Delaware
by
County
Delaware
actually
County.
took the action on that.
Oh, it was a county thing.
And I guess
That's
right
right. It
now
just
it's going to
happened.
have to go through a legal procedure where the value is put on it. It could take some time.
Yeah. So, it doesn't, by doing this, it doesn't give the township a right to go take land.
Yeah.
It doesn't give a township, there's still a value that we have to go to purchase that land. Like, it's not just given to the township. It might be, the person may say, yeah, I'm doing this. I'm more than happy to give it, particularly a developer who's developing an area. But a lot of times it will mean that we have to go purchase it. And so we have to think about that part of the process because, you start looking at some of these things, they're millions of dollars and all you've done is acquire the land and you haven't even put the trail on it yet. And so those are the kind of things we have to work through.
Is there an avenue within just what we were talking about here where, and I don't know this, is this something that this committee could recommend to the board? Can we recommend things to the township board supervisors that actually could become local law? Number one question. The reason why I'm asking that question is there something that we could do that if future development wants to happen on a private piece of property, right? Say it's large enough where you could fit, I don't know, 30, 40 units of single family homes in some way, shape or form, that we could actually have a law to protect some of the space within that where the Toll Brothers, for whatever reason, is going to develop it, where they would be forced to put in a trail as part of the agreement of giving them the access to permits. I
Well,
don't know.
that's kind of what happened with the listener development.
That's why I'm asking, yeah.
We do have,
Yeah, but wasn't that contingent upon zoning practices?
excuse me.
Wasn't that contingent upon zoning practices? So like they got subdivision and based off subdivision,
Yes,
there were certain restrictions put on that land.
yes, but they chose to develop under a cluster
Yeah.
piece that was developed really specifically for that development. And so there were certain things that come out. We're really in the process of rewriting zoning right now. And one of the things we're saying is and when we look at zoning and we look at land development, we're saying we should incentivize what we want and then disincentivize what we don't want. And so, for example, right now, by right, if I want to go in and develop in an open space today, depending on what area in the township it is, I'm just going to pick an area that there's some areas that we require 60,000 square feet lots. So you go in, and if I can put in 60,000 square foot lots and just do one right after another, put a road down the center, I can go do that. But if we want, and that's by right, but if we want to encourage cluster, moving the houses closer together, making sure that there's more open space somewhere in the property, then we should make that by right and make the other way the conditional use. And we've been doing it the opposite. The township's done it the opposite all along. And a lot of municipalities have, so we're looking at rewriting the zoning. So we incentivize the other. We incentivize the idea of cluster developments, moving properties closer together, keeping more open space, more green space that's shared in the process.
But the fee in lieu of kind of throws a whole monkey wrench.
Well, the fee in lieu of, the fee in lieu of is more for recreation.
Yeah.
than it is, I mean, typically that's where we get the fee in lieu of. Or if somebody, for whatever reason, can't plant the number of trees because the development just can't take it. Like some of what's happening over in the Ellis Preserve, the number of trees that can be planted back, they've actually exceeded in some areas, but have not been able to hit the same number in other areas.
What about green space?
Green space, they've maintained what they were required to based on the PRD. And so there was 13 acres that's been kept, and there's actually a trail in that 13 acres. It's kind of between the mainline health and the old cottages and over to where AmeriHealth is. They're in that area. And that's a requirement of the project.
You're talking about lowering the number of the square footage per area,
Per lot.
per lot, sorry, per lot,
Or
as a
the,
compromise to getting them to do the common shared spaces. But then overall, that, I mean, historically, that reduces the overall green space in the entire property, doesn't it?
no,
I'm
it
not saying
actually,
shared green space. I'm
it
saying-
actually increases it.
Really?
Yeah, because you end up typically with less roadways, which which chew up a lot of it. You end up with less disturbed space overall. And so you are able to leave certain spaces more natural. And you haven't created all the, to use a really good example, if you know where the White Horse subdivision is, the White Horse subdivision, that is obviously, that's a fully developed, over 60,000 square foot lots. Almost all of it's now grass versus heavy wooded areas and things like that, where if you push cluster development, you can maintain the heavier wooded areas. You can do those kind of things, not disturb as much steep slope. There's a lot of benefits to doing the cluster.
When the developer first came into the DuPont property, the first thing they came out with was a by right single-family residence over the entire property. Would have knocked down all the trees, wouldn't have any open space left for anybody. And they could have built that. But we were able to persuade them to cluster, and they kept the same number of units so that the units were clustered in a space which allowed a lot of open space. We were able to save the huge amount of trees, and we got the 50 acres.
That's different. You're saying keeping the same number of units versus the changing of the square footage per unit on the lot. I'm sorry, lot. I keep on saying that.
Sometimes what you do, for example, some clustered ordinances, and we're getting really off topic. And so I want to apologize. But what I would say is it's, and we could talk about this more later, but basically what cluster will do, you might incentivize by giving a few more houses, but you've cut everything else down.
Before we move on, could you post back up the scope of work for me, please? I would like to propose that we add number 8, speaking to the work that we propose, budgetary items. So to develop proposed budgetary items to support the above items to be presented to the Newtown board as the last thing. So that way it encompasses all those things to say that's what we.
Good idea.
That is a good.
Can you repeat what you said again?
So to develop proposed budgetary items to support items 1 through 7 to be presented to the Newtown board for approval.
Would any of the members like to be a part of that group? We do have a time. Need to push these things.
Part of what group?
I don't know if we even know all the groups yet, though.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I have no experience with the budget in terms of just knowing what the cost will be. You might be putting the cart before the horse.
If I could just make a quick recommendation to you, I think like if you could come back and say, we would like to put some signage on 5 areas, around some trails. I think we could come up with some rough guesstimate of what the number is to give you a budgetary item of what you're looking for. So if between now and your next meeting, you could come up with the kinds of projects you're wanting to try to accomplish. Normally, I would ask you to figure out the dollars. I'll work with George and we'll come up with dollars to make that recommendation back to the board so we know what it is you're trying to accomplish for next year. Understanding, knowing that you're new, my guess is the board will work with you as if you come up with and say, we'd really like to add this and we haven't had it. Fortunately enough, we've managed well with our finances that if something comes up in the middle of the year, we can usually figure that out.
And I think from listening to everyone here tonight, I think there are some short-term goals and some long-term goals that have already been discussed. And perhaps maybe we could just prioritize those things for which ones might be most cost effective.
Yeah, we talked about that last time. It's like the prioritization of figuring out so that we can break up into, John, like the subgroups of people, like, okay. Like maybe some people are gonna say they're gonna work on the quick, really nice grabs, and there's gonna be a higher volume of them, and then there's the more lofty goals. that are-
I have that in mind. That's in our agenda. We have the comparison of land-based trails coming up, but also the developing some of the skills that we have and see who's skillful at what, and maybe set up groups on that.
That was a separate page in the notes that we received, right? There was a
Yes.
listing of skills.
Yep.
So yeah, do you want us to just submit, I can do this, or how do you want to do that?
Well, what I was thinking of, and I guess that's the next item on the agenda. And I, 7:30 now. We have some time.
Well, I love to be effective and efficient, so we could probably just send out a survey electronically, and individuals can participate in a survey.
Yeah, one thing I would like is to get a little bit of background from each of us, an introduction, so that we have an idea of what your skill set is and where your passions lie.
On this list that's under the next category that has these 8 items that you have: grant writing, management and training of volunteers, event planning, nature walks, field trips, environmental education, public speaking presentations, photography, videos and PowerPoint, website development, and then marketing, advertising, announcements. Maybe we can literally just send, I mean, we already have it. Maybe we can all do what you were just recommending, is just write our name in underneath the categories where we think would be most beneficial. That goes to you.
Yep.
And then if there's for some reason gaps, then that's where you have to make the tough call,
Yeah.
saying, nope, sorry.
Yeah, I think in the interest of time, that might be better.
And I would say too, I'm happy to say too here what I don't do, in other words, I don't, I run a professional membership organization. We don't do grant writing. So that would be, be to someone else who does that. So
Okay.
I'll also, in full disclosure, fill out those too, just to say, well, I'm a quick learner. You probably don't want me
Yeah,
there.
and if we're on that topic, can anybody think of other skills that we might add to this list?
I mean, maybe it falls under public speaking and presentations, but I would say public outreach. Specifically, a lot of the people that you're talking about, not my backyard, we know that we want to change how we're going to communicate with them and not be adversarial, and try to actually go and seek those people out. I know somebody said there were 2 people at our last meeting that have historically been against these type of things. So maybe we need to start with those people that are most vocal to try to start winning them over in a different way than maybe has been done before. So maybe I'll talk with you guys and ask those questions, but I would say that would be the only additional thing that I would add, is, and it kind of falls under that category. So
Well, the
we just-
budgeting, we haven't identified, right? The, just people who are, familiar or don't mind crunching that ultimately, or
So-
giving some.
So maybe add number 9 to your list under that we can include for what we send around.
Mhm.
That makes sense.
We talked a lot about like kind of making signage, and it takes a skill set to do that. So being able to make interpretive signs, informative signs, getting across the, leave no trace and proper trail etiquette rules and stuff like that, that would be like another category. It would sort of fall into the education, but making and developing those signs so they look pretty and they're getting the message across in an efficient way is a skill set that it
Okay.
kind of combines a few things on there.
What I can do is redo this list and send it around to everybody. Am I allowed to do that under?
Yeah, just as long as what people are doing is just saying, I can do this and not expounding upon that
Right.
very much, you're
Right.
fine.
Yeah.
I would make note, you might just take web development off. We have a website for the township. And if you
Okay.
want, we would create a page for you. You might have somebody that helps with that, but it's pretty set. So it's not like you have to have somebody create a web page. We've already got that.
How about
So
Facebook?
maybe-
Well,
development?
Maybe
I
we
was
could
gonna,
put
I think
social
we should
media.
replace it if we
Social
don't want
media.
it to be website development. I think we should replace it with, like
Social
app
media.
creation,
media.
an app,
Technology.
social
That's
media,
fine.
Technology is a nice umbrella.
and an interactive map of the trails, because that's one of the things that we talked about as like the last phase of deployment in public education. We got to get some technology in there, and we should launch an app where people can say, can look where they're going, what some of the leave no trace or what certain etiquette is. I mean, we can post a lot of that on the app too. Because people, as we said, are not going to the website. So let's change that from website development.
Didn't we talk about integrating it into an existing app, though? That was.
That was something
used, or is that
which we could
different?
still do. It doesn't change any of that. I think it all falls under this category. We were talking about existing trail apps, All Trails, Gaia, things that a lot of people use that like trails that are just more popular. It's not worth us developing our own.
Mhm.
But it still falls under app development technology. People that are familiar with it, I think it still falls under that nice category, which is important, I think.
As far as social media goes, I work for a federal agency. I know there's things that we can and cannot say on social media as we're representing the agency. I'm assuming there's similar stuff
There is.
representing a township. So that is another, as stupid as it sounds, skill set that I think is important to know. Like you can't say, yeah, hey, this local business, come check them out because they're awesome, on our social media. Like you have to be very careful about what you say. and
Yeah,
how you say it.
everything for social media needs to come through the township.
Yeah.
And right now, what we're asking all groups to do is do all social. If you want to post on Twitter, you want to post on Facebook, we'll post it. We'll get it up there for you off of the township website. We'll drive people there. That's great. You can then like it and forward it and whatever you want to do. But that way, whatever's coming out from the township is officially reviewed. We have a communications person that we brought on to review all of that, make sure we stay within our guidelines and those kind of things.
So we might have somebody within this committee that says underneath that skill set that's part of that little subgroup that would maybe create the draft, I'll call it.
Exactly.
With guidance probably from somebody like Leonard who does it constantly and knows your rules so that it makes it easier on that person. We send it to them and then they upload.
Well, Leonard doesn't necessarily follow our rules. And that's okay because Leonard's functioning as an individual and that's fine.
So you
But
can post
what's
as
coming
yourself,
from the
but not as the
township has to
green-
stay
Yeah,
a certain
okay,
way.
yeah.
So we need it to come through us and then be reviewed.
Even his one that's called Leonard Altieri Township Supervisor, because he has two
It's
different.
that is his own. We do not control what he
Okay.
does on that.
Okay, I wasn't sure because I know he has two. He has a personal one and he has one.
Yeah,
that
and I know
says-
what he's doing and it's great and I'm glad he does it. But for purposes of official speaking for the township, we have to control it through ours.
No, that's good to know, though. Glad you brought it up.
Question, just because, for instance, last meeting, it wasn't until the very end that things like the sunshine law came out.
Yeah.
But how about is there any process document that you have so we sort of know these things, or do we just take notes as you go along? So now we've learned that there's a communications person, et cetera. If there's anything that's sort of part of an orientation.
We're
that would be
I'm
great.
actually working on an orientation and you'll be already kind of operating for a period of time, but I'm working on an orientation.
Great.
I've created, with the suggestion of actually Bruce and Wade, who is the chair of the Parks and Rec, we have a group called Township Organizations.
That's great.
And so John will be the representative for you on the township organizations or whomever he chooses to send for the purpose of working together and doing that. But we're going to bring everybody together in January, at least the key folks, whoever your chair is, whoever your vice chair is, whoever the secretary is. And we're going to go through training, how to run a meeting, what are the ways we work with, what are the softwares that we use, what's, all of those kind of things. And we're going to go through all of those guidelines, that we have, that we follow, so that everybody
Well,
kind of has that
That's great.
idea.
And even if I, realize that we can't all necessarily attend, but some sort of handbook, for instance,
Yeah.
we have a board book. My sister serves on a multimodal thing in Boulder. And she said, oh, we went to 3 hours of training before we even met. So that sort of thing, and running
Yeah.
boards myself for a living, it can help.
We're good.
Voices
We'll
for
be doing
success, so
something
that's-
actually for the other members as well. So
That's great. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
This may be a stretch, but in the concept of diversity, I don't know if any of our documents are in Spanish, or if you'd be interested in considering that, at least for signage.
I think it might be more important to look at what are the major languages spoke within the township, but not assuming that it's Spanish. It could be, a dialect of Indian or something like that. So finding out what may be the second most popular language, and then looking at trying to get translations of that instead of just assuming. Sorry. I hope that was
No,
A lot of
again,
signage has gone to symbols over the years because of,
the
in
universal
very,
signage.
in
Yes.
very diverse communities, symbols are more recognizable.
And that goes beyond just languages. If someone has a developmental issue or something like that, if you have a symbol that is kind of universal, it's easier for people of all walks of life, regardless of
Yeah.
what language they speak to recognize. So using those universal symbols.
On the next one.
Yeah, next on the agenda is 8.3, discuss priorities and project evaluation procedures. And I don't know whether we're come up against some time deadlines. I know we want to get certain things that the township is presenting to us. But if nobody has an objection, we can start moving into that. Okay. What I put together was a comparison of land-based trails. And this is primarily because that's what I know the best. So it's not necessarily indicative entirely of the way we want to go. But what I can do here is go over some of these land-based trails, give you an idea what might be involved, and see if certain people might be interested in these specific trails.
For clarification, be interested in these specific trails to do what task?
Sorry?
To do what task?
Well, it'd be primarily getting a lay of the land. If they have to do some contacting, there's going to be some townships that may be involved. I think each person should get familiar with that particular trail and understand it a little bit better. And then work with me and township, try to move forward and get some things done.
I think I can clarify a little bit. So I think maybe what we're talking about here is we have all these different trails that were identified in the master plan here. And they've already been ranked by as you said, by Gilmore and Associates, but we need to look at some of that because some of that might be different here, but it doesn't matter. We'll go to the assumption that how they're ranked and prioritized is good for now. And then we break it up into maybe individual persons or individual teams of two or something. And essentially you're project managing each trail than you're giving. You're giving a trail and you're gonna say, okay, I'm gonna look at all of the different things associated, what township does it potentially connect to, where it connects to parks. I'm gonna go survey, look at those two parks and start asking questions, write stuff down, and then formulating a plan that then gets delivered to the rest of us in one of our meetings
Got
to
it.
kind of say, oh, well, I think here's some of the big issues here. But
Yes, that
I
makes
agree
sense.
with this priority that they listen in Gilmore's, or I don't because of this. Is that?
Yeah, and there's
Makes sense.
also certain information that did not appear in the plan. And I'm familiar with a lot of those details on each of these particular trails. And can sort of spotlight what some of the areas that we're going to have to overcome, certain things that has to be done. And any one of these can take off very quickly if the right things fall into place.
Are we missing a page on the exhibit here? Is it just, does it start at 5 for a
It
reason?
starts at 5 because that's where the land-based trails started.
Understood. Okay, thank you. Right. Thank you.
Yeah. Would you like me to describe them, or is it sufficient what we have put down?
No, I think it is at least for people for us to peruse, maybe when we're going through the list that you have for
Okay.
the skills, maybe that's the homework for everybody
Yeah,
before the next meeting is
Yep.
writing down their skills in that and then going through this
okay.
and maybe trying to identify. I mean, you can do a lot with Google Earth to
And
look
we
at
could
this
do
stuff.
this
definitely.
the same way we did the other one. If you have an interest in any of these trails, let me know.
So I was just about to say that homework before the October meeting is for each of us to put our name next to the skills inventory sheet. And then also we could put our name next to the comparison of land-based trails.
Yes. And that would get us a good running start for next meeting.
That's great.
Yeah, I think with maybe our agenda next week, we realize time and how much.
This is, they can't be longer than 2 hours.
It's hard early
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we're still
Yeah.
feeling this process out.
We might want to try to allocate, time and then have a timekeep, or have the secretary as timekeeper or something like that. Because it can go on. Yeah. And it
I
is-
think,
it's hard after a full day of work. Yeah.
I'll put the note in here that I will make sure kind of we know when it's an hour and a half and when we know it's an hour and 45 minutes and start thinking about wrapping up and
Mhm.
moving agenda items that
Yeah.
weren't touched to next
And,
meeting.
and that would be my question. Yeah.
That's a good
Given the time
because
and
we
all,
are
'cause you
coming
don't
up
want
on
to
the
short,
time.
you don't
Yeah.
want to shortchange
Uh,
these others. Yeah.
Perhaps we should move to the next item being 8.7, and that's a discussion of Newtown strategic plan. Nease?
Yeah, if I can, what I'll do is if I can, I'm gonna actually briefly talk about the strategic plan tonight to spend just a couple minutes on it. And then if I can, I'll just jump into the next one down and I'll hit both of them and I'll try to do it all in about 5 minutes. How's that sound? So just so you're aware, the township about 2 years ago went through the process of putting together a strategic plan that it actually kind of finally adopted at the end of last year. We've been taking that strategic plan and using it for most of our decision processes, and we trying to get it so we do it for all of our decision processes. If something doesn't fit in the strategic plan, we need to really look at why we're doing it and why we're spending money on it. And so that's become a very important part. So I would recommend, not that you need another homework assignment, but that you at least look at the strategic plan. It's listed as draft on the website, but it is pretty much in its final form. There was a couple of very minor changes made to it, and it's up now. But if you have questions, I'm more than happy to spend time and answer anybody's questions on it. But I would encourage you to start looking, go down a little further, go down a little bit more. That page would actually be not a bad reading, just the background of how they went through the strategic plan, what page is that? I can't see it. 6 or 7. Okay, 6 and 7, but then getting down a little bit further, a little bit more, and go on beyond this, go beyond all of this. And this just talks about how we gather data, go down This page now, starting here, starts talking about our directives and our desired outcomes. This just lists the directives.
Next page.
I think this one just lists the directives, all of them, and then the next page gets specifically the directives, outcomes, and initiatives from that strategic plan. And so if you will look, there are, particularly when we look at walkability, there's some sections there that do that and talk about that. So just suggest you just make yourself kind of aware of what some of the things we're trying to achieve. And then think about that as what we're doing as we put priorities to things. This is where, if it doesn't tie back to the strategic plan, we're probably not going to place a lot of emphasis on it. But I will tell you, walkability of our township is part of the strategic plan. And that's really what you guys are looking at in green space, right? So that's all I'm going to say about that. Under the next thing, if I can, I'm going to jump forward and just real quick talk about the sustainability. With the sheet, here it is. On the sustainability sheet, the board in May passed a resolution that it was going to participate in the PA sustainability program, certified program that came out of the recommendation from the EAC. And so we're working with them. I will say we've gone through, I think, Steve jumped over to that. This is the document that we're using. There's also a document in your paperwork that I think Steve has put together for you. And I don't know what I did with it here. But anyway, it lists 5 or 6 areas that are related to that. And I'm just going to real quick hit the ones on it. So if you're looking at this page, number 1 on that page is tied to 7A, which is on basically the 3rd page in. The next one down is 7B. So that one, then we jump all the way down to flip the page to the next page, and we're about 3/4 of the way down. After 14B is 7C, because they went in numerical order for some reason. I don't know why 7C is by itself, but it's by itself there. And under healthy communities, it may have gotten cut and paste wrong. I think we need to move it. But anyway, those 3 is 1, 2, 3 on your sheet. And then 4 is 21A and 21B. And then did I skip one? I may have skipped one. Hold on a second.
So that's 4, 7A, 7B, 7C, 21A and B.
Is that
Is
4?
21B 5?
Yeah, and 21B is 5, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
That's okay.
And then number 6 is 23D. And so some of these, you'll see that we have other groups mentioned with them. In every case, we've assigned in most cases, we've assigned a department from the township. We're assigning it to a committee like yours. And then we're assigning it somebody who's kind of like the lead, and or maybe potentially in some cases, it's like George and the chief, or myself and George, depending on how much it crosses over different areas. So so that's the part that's been added by us, who's responsible. What we're doing is we're looking for the things, just so you understand the way this is going to work, is that when you and or us come up with the thing that we believe we've achieved one of these, we're going to review it as a committee here. And if you think we've achieved it, then we'll go ahead and document it accordingly, and we'll put it up, and that's how we'll add it. But if you think we haven't really reached that, and we were, staff is stretching or something and saying, well, maybe you really haven't done that one yet, then we will go ahead and go back and we'll keep working until we get there. So that's the idea. Before we post it up on adding it to the PA's level, we want to make sure it's been reviewed by staff, been reviewed by you, and then also reviewed by the board of supervisors. So that's how we're working through this to make sure it gets done. Any questions?
Yes.
And I'm sorry I went over my.
No, that was extremely helpful. 23C, that
Yes.
kind of talks about what I was talking about earlier with ordinances as it relates to our committee. So is that something where an act under this committee, we would recommend to the township that say, we did a review through this committee of all existing, zoning subdivision ordinances to make sure that they not only align with the master plan, but then with the goals of this committee?
Yes.
That was kind of like what I was
Yeah,
talking
and,
about.
and in this case, number 20, that one, which is, I think, number 6, we have you working at the EAC on that, because we also have EAC on that one.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Right.
Steve, you had said there's 5 areas, but it's 6, right?
Did I say 5? I
Yeah,
meant 6.
okay, thank you.
I apologize.
No worries.
I've talked more than once today, so I'm in trouble.
Okay, next item is going to be old business. I just want to say a few things. This committee had a table at Circle at sundown. Wonderful get together. It's something I'm going to remember a long time. But Beth Dunshisa was there and I was there. And we had a big map showing the trails, which Bruce was kind enough to provide to us. We had a lot of interest. We had some handouts and they were just about all gone by the time we were done. So that, I think, might have been our initial effort in publicizing what we do. And I think it was well received. Section 9.1, updated information in the Delaware County Open Space Grant. Please.
Sure. So just very quickly, we did, as we reported at the last meeting, we did submit a grant to Delaware County for a feasibility study to investigate the Newtown Square Branch Rail Trail, which basically runs between Bryn Mawr Avenue and over to 252. More importantly to us, between Brookside Park and Career Park. And again, we only kind of undertook it because of the timing of the grant that was available. This committee had not formed up yet and met yet. And so to get the permission to submit the grant and to do the homework and try to get some numbers in to get something in. So it was an $85,000 request that we put in to do this feasibility study. And yes, it incorporates the information that you would do with any feasibility study, planning and estimating and surveying and those kind of things. But we also went very heavy on our request for public participation. There's basically along that 1.3 miles where the railroad used to run and is now owned by Pico. Along that 1.3 miles, there's about 70 properties that border it. And so we wanted to make sure that we were putting money into the feasibility study to engage those people. And so, we estimated how long, we wanted to spend with each one, because that's what it's about. It's about listening. I mean, this is a feasibility as to whether this trail is realistic. It looks great on paper. Does it actually work when you go to look to see if you can implement it? And we want to take the time with the people that live next to it. And so that was all part of what was in the proposal. We should hear back mid-October. Ballpark is when Delaware County is going to make a decision. And as soon as we know, we will update this committee.
Can I request that I would like to personally be a part of that if it does go through, because one, I live in St. Albans, which connects to Greer Park. I'm a member at St. Albans Swim Club, which is right there, Brookside there. And I think it would be great personally. And I think from what I've seen in the initial plan, it's definitely feasible. It's just a matter of money. And then I think I would like to, because I live in the neighborhood, it would help with conversing with the homeowners that back up to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The last time.
I'm very sympathetic to it, obviously, because I'm in the neighborhood and
Yep.
I kind of get it. So
It sounds like you would be the perfect person,
I would like to. very much
because
so.
the last thing we would want is somebody from outside dictating what they should do. Back in the 2000s, we tried to get that through, and Pico, the owner of that property, was very accommodating. We did get a license offer from them, but there was a large amount of public reaction. And I think a lot of that can be alleviated by someone like you getting in there and working
Yeah,
with these people.
I think it could definitely work. And again, going at private landowners in a different tact. I don't know about any of you guys, but I would much rather the township own the property versus Pico.
We
Just
probably
to-
will never own.
you know what I mean though.
I
Okay,
mean, in
but-
this case,
yeah.
this is one of those cases where Pico's probably not going to give us ownership of the land.
Okay.
But if we can work with Pico to get to be able to use it, and George's and I both met with them and discussed this already. You know, and the good news is they just haven't said no. And they've been saying no to a lot of projects because of liability issues. But they understand that we see this as vital in connecting two spots. And so hopefully we will continue to work that side. Even as the feasibility studies, even without knowing where the county is, we're going to continue the process with Pico to try to keep working through that, is what I'm saying.
What are we calling that? Is that called the railroad trail? I can't remember.
I think that's what it's called in
Okay.
the Newtown,
Okay.
the
Rails trail.
Yeah,
Rails
in the,
trail,
in the Greenways Trail, I believe it's called the Newtown Square Rail Trail.
Okay.
I think on the Delaware County potential trails map, they call it the Newtown Square Branch Railroad Trail or Rail Trail. So they're same concept.
Thank you.
I don't know if it would be helpful at all, like if you do get the grant and you go ahead with the feasibility. If you, any photography type stuff where like, hey, this is something that's extra special, maybe having some visuals to represent that, I'm happy to help with that.
Sure. Thank you. That's great.
He's an excellent photographer. Ready for an art show.
Awesome.
Okay, next on the agenda, discussion and possible recommendation of Penndot multimodal grant. Terrence?
So I think I shared with you last time that we went out actually for two grants, and both, in fact, I shared tonight earlier that we went out for $2.5 million grants, basically a little less on both of them, but basically to do a trail that would go from here all the way down Campus Boulevard, go through Drexel Lodge, back out to Route 3, behind, Engolf out to Route 3, come back, and then either down Ellis Avenue or down College and back out to here and connect. We have a little trail that runs through the backside of the property and goes back up through the Little League and connecting all of those pieces. We asked for 5 million basically, and we got 650,000, which means that there's a big gap. And so the township's not in a position to write a check for the difference at this point. So what we're looking for is what would be the best project for the 650, and that would have the most impact. And so
It's not, the application and the award is not tied to necessarily the original.
well, yes, it's tied to the original. So it has to be within the area, but we're going to go back and say, obviously we asked for 2.5 million. We only got 650,000. So therefore we're going to ask to shrink the project to equal that. We're happy to put the match in and do that, but we're going to do it in segments. Obviously they didn't want to fund the whole piece. And so that's our approach. We think we can do that. We've got some support from some of the elected officials. And so we think
Match. Of the match.
well, not just the match, but also from the state level for us to at least get a segment.
Okay.
And so that's what we're going to do. That's what we'd like to do. But what we wanted to do, George and I could sit down and say, this is where it needs to be. What we'd like to do is have you form a small committee. I'm thinking probably 2 or 3 that would come and meet with us, talk about it, show you where the potential area is for this particular grant of that piece of the trail, and then let's make a recommendation that that's what we'd like to accomplish. So what we're looking for potentially is a group of two or three who would want to participate in that so that we can come back to you with a plan of what's the best way, and then we can go back to the state.
What's the time frame on it?
Yesterday. So
I'm glad I asked.
we probably have another month and a half before we really need to be pushing back to the state of what we want to do, so that we have enough time to do the engineering and get it built and those kind of things.
And this was the section going from the township down Campus Boulevard. to
Really,
Drexel
this
Lodge.
is actually the section from Drexel Lodge out to 3 and back to here, I think is the way that was, if you remember
That piece
exactly.
was.
It was, so it was the Drexel Lodge piece. Potentially we could figure out how to tie Florida Park into Drexel Lodge, and then, excuse me, how to get from Drexel Lodge out to Route 3. I've already working with the developer, Equus. They're getting ready to do the widening of Route 3. They've committed to actually putting in a sidewalk along Route 3 that between Uno and Goddard School. And so we'll get that section. So the ideal would be, can we connect either from there to Drexel Lodge? Can we connect from Drexel Lodge to Florida Park? Something along those lines. There's going to take a fair amount of switchback to get into Drexel Lodge.
Yeah.
If we come off of Campus Boulevard. George has looked, we don't think it's feasible to do it out on Route 3 right now. The grades are too steep, and we don't really want to be throwing people Route 3 at 55 miles an hour on steep grades.
I live in Florida Park, so I'm happy to help with that.
That would be
I've
great.
walked to Nell frequently over the years, so I'm happy to help.
That's
I
great.
use that area.
Yeah, I live in Ellis, so, Ellis Preserve, Newtown Walk, so I
That's great.
run that area and all, and
Stephanie, Amy,
I would like to be part of that group.
You say you would like to be?
Stephanie,
What?
Amy, and John will form a subcommittee.
But I think you probably need to have an agreement. You probably should make a recommendation on that to your, to make a motion and an action that you're creating that subcommittee to take action on it.
Yep. We can't do it this time. We cannot do it this time.
I think you can, the way we wrote it because you're just making a recommendation. You're taking action to make the recommendation. I think the way we wrote the agenda, you could take that action.
Okay.
Purposely wrote it, so I thought you could make that action.
I see discussion of possible recommendation.
Yeah,
Yes, clever.
Is this going to be in the form of a motion?
Yeah, you're
Or
just
just
making a
direct-
motion that you form a subcommittee to get an answer back to the whole committee. And that the subcommittee is made up of Amy, Bethany, and John.
Right.
Oh, you're sorry.
Do I hear a motion?
I
Motion
move,
second?
I move that we create a subcommittee to address the $650,000 grant for the Campus Trail project.
Second.
Second, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Next on the agenda is additional business. Do we have any?
We are 8 minutes over time.
Okay. Board comment? Public comment? Bruce?
Good meeting. That's what I was-
Okay.
Thank you.
We're gonna put that in the notes.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Items for next agenda, we skipped over a couple. We just pushing those to the next agenda, which is fine. I want to make sure that, like you said, we don't want to completely skip out and then maybe not add too many to the next one because of this. We skipped over items
4, 5, and 6.
8.4, 8.5, 8.6, right?
Well, we talked about
We
them within
did
the
talk
charge,
about
yeah.
them.
Well, I know, but because there was exhibits and stuff, it was,
Yeah.
Yeah. I do have it requested that Rich Kerr be a speaker for the next agenda, so maybe that could be put in. I said before.
that's the gentleman from the Haverford.
That's correct.
Yep, absolutely.
Could we limit time speaking?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I will tell you, I regularly for Board of Supervisors meetings, tell people presentation time is this amount of time.
Exactly, yeah, you have.
And so if you want to give and whatever you think you want, I'd probably give 5 or so minutes less because people usually go over. That's just that's the nature of that.
Well, and questions too.
And then the other thing that you may want to do is, work with John and actually figure out how much time you want allotted to each agenda item.
I agree.
And
Yep.
that will help you kind of stay on track.
Yes. And if I told Rich Kerr at a time, are we thinking 15 minutes?
15 with or without questions?
That's with questions, I think, because 15 is a long
Yeah.
time to
Yeah,
talk.
that's a lot.
So I'd say that, if he talks for half of that and then that allows half of that for questions, that would be,
15 minutes
Mr.
including
Killen was
questions.
worth every
yeah,
second.
no, and no, yeah.
Yes, that's for sure.
You did a fabulous job, so this isn't
Yes.
about you.
Well, it was a good set the stage here.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
been moved and seconded. All signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Meeting is adjourned.